My name's Jess McQuade, and I would start with where I work. So I work for, I'm lucky to work for an environmental organisation. So I work for the World Wildlife Fund in Wales. And my role there is trying to make Welsh governments tackle climate change and promote sustainable development in everything they do. And as part of that process, I was really involved in the development of a piece of legislation which I think actually provides us with an opportunity now. As Nigel said, now is kind of the time for transition. The opportunity that he talked about, I think, is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So just wondering if there's anyone in the room who's heard of that? Okay, that's a good start. And who's seen the Cardiff Council's Wellbeing Assessment? Is that one? Yeah, so one person. So in fact, so in essence, the Wellbeing Future Generations Act, each local authority is required to produce wellbeing objectives, which is the plan for how they're going to make sustainable development a central organising principle. And there's a consultation which closed yesterday, so we kind of missed that. But I'll kind of go through a bit of the process, and I'll come back to that right at the end, so you can kind of maybe get a sense of how you can be involved in the future. So I'll just give you a bit of history about the Wellbeing Act. Are you interested in that? Yeah. So in Wales, in our constitution in Wales, we've got a requirement to tackle sustainable development, which is one of the few constitutions in the world to have that. But I think kind of 10 years in, that it was felt that there wasn't any difference being made. So there were a number of reports by the Audit Office which looked at how they could embed sustainable development as a central organising principle of the Welsh Government. The Minister at the time, Jane Davidson, kind of persuaded the Labour manifesto for the last term to include a piece of legislation which would actually require the Welsh Government and all public bodies in Wales to have sustainable development as a central organising principle. So that was a really big deal. And so last Assembly term was the business of trying to get that legislation in place. So there's quite a long consultation process to develop that legislation. A number of environmental organisations, so WWF, Friends of the Earth, Oxfam, Strand, lots of them all got together to develop something called the Sustainable Development Alliance, who really lobbied hard during that process. So we lobbied the National Assembly, the Welsh Government, had a really kind of public campaign to try and get environmental sustainability at the heart of that legislation, because there was kind of an attempt to move it back to social kind of sustainable development rather than environmental sustainable development. So the good news is that we kind of won that battle, and we ended up with a very strong piece of legislation in Wales, which at its heart has environmental sustainability, and I'll go through why I think that's the case now. So I think what we've got in Wales is something to be really proud of. The United Nations came to Wales, I'm not sure it's Ban Ki-moon, but one of the UN people came to Wales and said something like, Wales is doing today what the world needs to do tomorrow. But they also said, part of the quote that gets missed in that is, but you now have to go and deliver it. So, I mean, that's the big challenge that we're facing now. But I think as a Welsh person, I'm really interested in sustainability because my job, my personal life, I'm really proud to have that piece of legislation here. And as a transition movement, I think kind of now is our time, because we've actually got a piece of legislation in Wales which makes public authorities do what we've actually been saying for the last 10, 15, 20 years needs to happen on local, national, regional, global levels to make the change, both for our environment but also for the kind of social exclusion that we see in many parts of Wales. So since April 2016, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in place. And for anyone who's interested, there's this document, which is kind of the accessible version that they produced. We've got some copies there for you can take home. And I'm actually going to read from this because it's kind of fairly straightforward. So the Act is called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Interestingly, it didn't start off being called that. It kind of the name got changed to that as an attempt to get a wider audience, to stop it being seen as an environmental issue and make it a wider social issue. Kind of mixed opinions on that. But it's kind of about the content and the delivery. I think that's important now. So as I said, all public bodies in Wales need to look or use this act to think about the long term, work better with people and communities and each other to look to prevent problems and take a more joined up approach. I think the key message in there is the communities, people and communities. I mean, that's what we are. So kind of using the act to engage with probably your Cardiff Council, I guess, is kind of the first level of engagement that you can use the act for. And then it's got a series of goals: prosperous Wales, resilient Wales, healthy Wales, more equal Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, a Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language, and really importantly, from WWF's perspective and from environmental sustainability, a globally responsible Wales. You have to find really hard to get that in there. You won't believe how hard. So I think what's really important is when you actually look under each of these goals, the language, the descriptors underneath are really, really key. And these, at the moment, those terms are really open and vague, and can kind of, public authorities can interpret them however they want. And that's what we're seeing at the moment, is they go, a prosperous Wales, so that means we need to improve GDP. But actually, when you look at the description of a prosperous Wales, it talks about proportionate use of natural resources, which is just fantastic. You combine that with a globally responsible Wales, and then you've got a situation where you should have Wales and public authorities start to look at where they source their products, kind of as they move into kind of a stable state, economy, etc., everything that Calvin was just talking about. And then a resilient Wales, and also in prosperous Wales, it's a low carbon economy. And then in a resilient Wales, it's kind of around encouraging biodiversity, adapting to climate change, etc. So a lot of the things that you're really interested in as Cardiff transition, I think, are kind of all in those goals. So look at the descriptors in the goals is really important. So that's the framework, the governance framework, and then in terms of how you influence it at a local level, each public authority, so that includes Cardiff Council, has to develop wellbeing objectives. And there's certain dates attached to this, and I kind of tried to get them, they're not easily accessible, the dates at which they have to do things. I tried to get it on the internet, and I found some stuff which I can circulate around to everyone who's interested. And you've actually just missed the consultation dates for inputting into Cardiff Council's objectives. So they've produced this. Cardiff Public Services Board, so it's actually Public Service Board, which is a combination of the local authority, health authority, police, who else is on the Public Service Board, education, fire service. So they all have to get together and kind of say how they're going to collectively, what they're going to do to meet those goals, and also kind of engage with community, etc.
That's where CPOC should be linking us in.
So yeah, so they should, so they're supposed, the formal body's supposed to have third sector rep, so Sheila, I think, the head of the CBC should be on that. And then how they engage their wider communities to get that voice, those mix, the community representative on there is really interesting. But the council as well has quite a wide engagement underneath that, so there's lots of things that they've done, which I didn't know as a citizen. So kind of, it's not reaching perhaps a wide enough audience at this stage. So that's something we can, so that's something we can look at. So I've gone through this and I've done my own analysis, but it's not too bad actually. I'm kind of fairly impressed. So they've got Cardiff has a thriving and prosperous economy. It doesn't really include low carbon within that or proportionate use of resources, but it does have a section on Cardiff as a clean, attractive and sustainable environment, where it talks about transport choices, environmental quality, etc. It doesn't talk really about global responsibility anywhere. I'm not surprised about that. So I don't think any of the statements do. So it's worth having a look at this, or I can do it with you in another session if you want, and kind of go through this with you. And they did say, I phoned them up and they did say to me that if we wanted to put a submission in tomorrow, we could. So maybe that's something to answer some questions about at the end, whether we think we've got time to respond to that by tomorrow. And then a key part of this is something called the Cardiff Liverpool City Report 2017. Anyone heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah? People fed into it through consultations? No? No.
Didn't hear about the consultation.
Yeah, so how is that happening? How is a group of active, interested citizens are kind of really not engaging in that? I mean, that's something that we need to reflect on. Maybe speak to the county council, speak to communities first. Like, I don't know, we can think about who to talk to.
Quite
about.
interesting, because I sit at the communities first work, and I sit on neighbourhood partnership meetings. Never come.
Yeah. So they've got duty in the Wellbeing Act to engage with communities and come up with new models. I am the biggest scrutiniser, critic of all of this, but it is their first time. So, and it is a new. Well, it's not an engagement, a consultation. Yeah, that's true. I'm being too kind. But so, there is, there's a new plan. Yeah, go on.
Yes, they've got to be completed by April 2018. So that what they've done is the first bit of it is to try and get some bit of planning into it. So now they've got to work it up March and April, and then they're going to go out for real form of consultation and their objectives, what they're going to do. So it's really, when I saw the sort of demonstration of what the dates were, that's the time where I feel that you can really get involved into it. Okay. It's between April and October, and that's when hopefully the Cardiff Council should be plastering it to everybody.
But maybe we can check that as a group.
Yeah.
There might be like a little working group that we can set up and make sure that we're feeding into that. I'd be happy to help with that.
Because there was a carbon light week which kind of transition sat on for a while in Carbon Council.
I think that might be gone.
Some of the people are still there, but have had to take on wider roles.
And of course that was sitting underneath something called One Planet Cardiff, which is actually a really good action plan. If they met all their actions in there, it would have. So bring that back. I don't know what's happened to that.
They've been heading in the right direction at various times in the past, but contingencies have stopped things.
Yeah, and that's the danger with the new systems, that all the things that were good before just get lost, and then they replace something with a new system which is not as good potentially. So I think that's something to be mindful of. So Cardiff Liverpool City is worth looking at because it does talk about some of the issues that Cardiff faces, which based on stats, and it talks about kind of Cardiff has one of the, in terms of cities in the UK, it's got one of the biggest single car use in all of the cities across the UK. Its emissions are really high from car use. Its air pollution is horrific from cars, it's one of the highest in the cities. And air pollution hasn't really been on people's agenda. I think it's just starting to come up now as a health issue, as a pollution, environmental issue. That might be something we can actually engage in the wider public. That might be something for Cardiff Transition to think about. So there's stuff in here that you can probably hook onto and influence and promote, but I think there's big gaps in there still. So kind of how you address ecological footprint is missing completely. It doesn't really get down to the nitty-gritty of how it's going to engage community. And a lot of what you do and what Calvin was just talking about, like the opportunities around food, grassroots up, it still feels very top down, and it doesn't feel like it's created a space through this system for that grassroots community value. So I think trying to look at how we can engage more in this process, which should be about bottom up, top down coming together, I think is how we can look at that. And trying to get your voice heard around all those amazing projects that you're doing. So the currency that you do, and the food growing, the mapping, and everything, that's exactly what sustainable development is all about. It's exactly what the council should be encouraging to happen, and enabling communities to do that in whatever way you think needs to be done. So I think, like Calvin says, now the time. So I think just making sure that we organise ourselves enough to feed into that formal process, get ourselves ready, and then get your voices heard and take over the world.
Good.
But yeah, so that's a kind of a quick run through. I'm quite tired now. I guess people must be quite tired. It's quite late. So should we take questions if there's anything? And any questions?
Let's say if you had, hypothetically, a carbon reduction target legally binding for Wales that have teeth, and it seems to me like there won't be a Future Generations Act. It's taught a lot in the NGO sector, and always the most a chatter at it, but to me, basically it's a pretty toothless piece of legislation. I don't really understand. I hear it always being talked about, but I don't really understand if it's actually achieving very much other than getting a lot of people using buzzwords like livability, and that it doesn't seem to be to have much teeth or much to bind the Welsh government particularly or councils to anything.
That's true, it hasn't got much teeth. It's a governance system to kind of try and enable a culture shift and a change. And I think that's where the role of groups and citizens like ourselves is to make it have the teeth. So you can use it as a lever now it exists. Actually, the language that we recognise and think needs to happen on the ground actually provides you with something else to hold the government to account or local authorities to account to say this is the change you should be doing, we're doing this, we want to see more, make this happen. So it's another lever for activists by which to get their voice heard and support the work they're doing. We have got, in terms of emission reduction targets, we've got the Environment Act in Wales, which sets an emission reduction target for Wales for at least 80% by 2050, and then they're currently in the process of setting 5-year budgets and targets for that, and they have to produce an action plan. So there's another structure underneath the Wellbeing Act for kind of climate legislation. There's another one for environmental legislation around kind of natural resource use in Wales.
How can they do that when energy is not devolved and energy is the highest emitter?
Because they can do it on areas where they've got devolved competence.
Yeah.
So kind of there's some areas of energy where we have got devolved competence and we're hoping to get more. And then kind of areas like transport, land use, home energy efficiency, etc. So you can, there's ways that you can cut or measure what Welsh Government's doing versus kind of where there's a system which is kind of EU ETS or government owned.
Because energy is our biggest emitter,
Yeah.
isn't it? Which we don't.
I think at the moment, I mean, you're saying it hasn't got teeth and it hasn't achieved anything, and it hasn't yet. It's a framework, really, because I think the key thing is this is an assessment. What's supposed to happen next is objectives, and the objectives are supposed to be measurable and appropriate and timely, and that's where you get in and say, look, that isn't appropriate, that isn't timely, you can't measure that, that's too vague, and then 2 years down the line, well, you didn't achieve that. Why didn't you achieve that? And that's where it all starts. This is just the beginning.
So it's a bit like the Equality Act that we've got in Wales. It's the same sort of framework. So it does rely a lot on people holding the government to account, constantly scrutinising. It does take a lot of effort. And of course, there's something called the Future Generations Commissioner, who has a role to some extent. That's some of the teeth that's around this. They have a role to scrutinise, they can call in to review, they can ask questions which the public will have to respond to in a public way. It's not as much as we wanted, but it's kind of more than we had.
Yeah, publicly embarrassed, you can't do more than that, really.
Yeah.
What would you do? You start fining them? I mean, it kind of...
She's already made a pronouncement that would be a full...
A few days ago.
It's not the most appropriate for the proceeding.
And so is Welsh Government immediately going to go against that recommendation? Which everybody can then really say, well, you've just made a mockery of the Welsh Future Generations Act. I think when we do hold that red card up against the words of the Act to government as publicly as possible, and as much of you can engage with that as possible, the more leverage it has.
I'll declare an interest over compulsory.
Do you want to come and sit
So
next to me?
I don't know everything about it. I know enough. I know what's all the...
What party are you an AM for?
No, I'm not an AM, I'm PCSU. That's tricky.
No, I think that the major danger is that public bodies will just go through it and try and treat it as a tick list and
Absolutely.
say, oh, what are we doing that might meet that? Oh yeah, we're doing that already.
You can
So we'll-
see,
that
you can see.
maps
So
to that. That's
basically,
fine, we've done
we're
that.
calling it retrofitting existing business
Yeah.
against the goals, which
Yeah.
kind of,
And
if
that's-
you can look at all of
that's not good,
the work,
yeah.
you can look at some of them, not naming names, but I've looked at 2 or 3,
I'm sure
what they've
that's
said on
right.
climate change, and it is appalling. I mean,
Yeah.
Cardiff is a bit better than the others, so, but it doesn't mean it's perfect. So that's the real danger, is retrofitting the goals onto existing business rather than it being about the transformational change that, using that term, transformational change. But, it's rather than changing how we do everything in Wales to kind of meet those goals. It would mean big changes.
And that's where my involvement internally from being on the union side is that is to make sure that staff within know that this is not retrofitting. This is a new way of working. It has already had major changes on the way of working inside. Inside Australia. And it's really just keeping the pressure on from internally. So I won't devolve everything that I know.
No.
Not on camera anyway.
No, I mean, and there's some very, very bright people working within the Welsh Government on some of these things. So it's hopefully that there's certain areas where you've still got very, very much struggling to come to terms with this.
Yeah, and I think the language that we use in WWF, some people say, oh, it's a long-term thing, it's a cultural change, it's going to take ages, you can't expect things to happen straight away. And we say, well, actually, some things do require change straight away, you need to identify those. So if you look at biodiversity decline in Wales and globally, that needs action right now. If you look at how we're going to reduce our emissions in Wales, that needs action right now. So the challenge, I guess, for you locally is to identify what you need to happen right now, to kind of identify, campaign on those priorities to help public bodies to kind of focus their resources on those areas.
So is it kind of understood within Welsh Government that part of this will happen if there's external pressure? That external pressure is one of the things that's been factored into making this effective.
That's the man behind you.
Yes, I think so.
I guess so.
I
mean,
think the
it's
minister is very much aware of public pressure.
Yeah. They talk a lot about the community and get the engagement side of it. So, we have to make that happen.
So where there's community scrutiny of some of these things, it's much more likely that stuff will be taken serious.
Possibly, probably.
So there's something
Let them
about
know you're watching.
Yeah.
So there's something about the resource being put into supporting that community process.
Yeah.
Then, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that there's supposed to be some kind of independent assessor of the objectives, isn't there? To when the objectives come out to decide, do they
Future
map?
Generations Commission is looking
Yeah,
at
I
that
think
currently. So,
it's part of that role or under that role.
Yeah.
But then the public can actually point out that they're a person to point it out to, if you like.
Somehow knowing that, isn't it?
Yeah,
To know that that's the route and that there is
It's
another
like they're the
door.
ombudsman,
Yeah.
if you like, that will red flag this is.
Yeah, and
This
the
is
audit,
wrong.
the Welsh Audit Office has got a role as well to review some of these objectives. I'm not quite sure of it yet.
Yeah, because it came as a surprise to me that all this has been going on. And yet I'm in the middle of the Welsh Government.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm someone who's looked at this at a legal perspective, kind of developed it, yet I'm only just coming to this now as a citizen in Cardiff, and if I'm this far away from it, who's involved in it, So that's something I think personally I'm going to take forwards, and if anyone wants to get involved in that.
But I wouldn't be surprised if Cardiff is a relatively large authority that's got forward plans anyway. A lot of smaller bodies are probably nowhere near having an assessment,
Yeah.
I suspect, because they don't have to have their objectives till March next year, isn't it?
yeah, it's,
No,
they've got to go out for consultation. In April, I
Surely
think it's
just
April.
now.
All over Wales.
Yeah.
So all local authorities will have to have that ready.
Yeah, because I think Cardiff are doing quite well on this. I'm not sure if any's been received in the Welsh Government. Nobody was quite sure how quickly they were going to get them when people were looking at.
Yeah.
But yeah, the public service board has been going for years now. So all local authorities will have something in place, but it's how well they're coordinating it with the
Yes.
communities.
So,
and
when's the
consultation.
deadline for their actual targets then?
April 2018, but they've got to go
Yeah,
consultation before that. So I think they've got to go out for consultation until October, and then it's October till April. They've got to be published and agreed by the government and various other people, I think, as well.
Yeah.
But we can put that on the website, so
Yeah.
I'll get that
Absolutely.
information. and put it on our website.
I'll try and see who is published. Because it's natural resources well.
Yeah, I'm sure the objectives, the local authority objectives should
Yeah,
be
the
done now.
timetable,
Yeah.
is the timetable, I think.
Slightly different question from me is more of advice really. As you said, we can get more involved now. It's a good time for us. One of the things I've always struggled with, we're seen as voluntary sector. So how do we get a voluntary group made up of many professionals in the room, many experts in different fields? How do you think we can get local authority to start seeing the actual value within the group? Like we can produce documents, we can save them money where they are, like for instance, mapping green spaces again, or they have done. How much repetition of activity goes on because they do not value work which is necessarily done outside unless they've contracted in a big consultant. How can we get that value to individuals, the volunteers, or the voluntary sector recognised? Or have you got any ideas and advice? Or is it an ongoing question really for everybody?
Yeah.
I don't know, I'll give that back to the people in the room.
No, it's been a difficult one. How can you get the local governments, local authorities to take you seriously? So I've met this mostly in the cycle campaign that I've been active with from time to time. And they've had dialogue with the council going on for years, but the actual impact of that on cycling infrastructure in Cardiff has been minimal.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of the work done has been, a lot of things which have happened have been orchestrated by Sustrans, who are a professional organisation who have managed to persuade the local governments, local authorities that they know what they're talking about. Now, they don't always know what they're talking about, and some of the things Sustrans have done for cyclists in Cardiff have been useless, and also some of the things the Cardiff Council has done. So it's been really difficult to get.
But again, somebody like Sustrans receives funding from the Welsh Government, so they're not particularly independent, are they? And they have their lips sewn.
Well, you know, actually, you know, they're a national organisation, they're not a
Yeah.
Welsh organisation. They're Bristol-based in the first place, but they're national.
Sustrans company gets funding from the Welsh
It
Government.
does,
doesn't it?
yes.
So
But that's
can't
because it produces cycle tracks for the Welsh Government.
Yeah.
And consultations and things. So
But when those organisations see issues and see problems, they can't say too much because they've got their lips sewn, because they've got fear of losing income.
I don't
I've
know.
heard this said a lot
I
about.
know, I don't know how true that is.
I don't think they feel very gagged. It's just the local authorities and things, they make their own decisions, and okay, they said that, but we'll ignore them.
But I think that's a question that we can pose to the local authority as part of this dialogue that
I mean, Renew Wales is an interesting model because it's,
Yeah.
you know, what about that on a Cardiff level,
Yeah.
where it's a network of people like ourselves who can get contracted to do pieces of work. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with transition on a certain level as well. So
Yeah, we can ask that question of them. Kind of why don't we, or how can we value kind of citizen, community, grassroots knowledge as part of your development plan?
Getting organised, getting funded, showing that you can do it better than they can,
It's also
and highlighting when they do it shit.
participatory democracy, isn't it? Trying to figure out what participatory democracy means. You know, when you've got a lot of people, how do you? Because I mean, the consultations are often a lot of the people who should know don't know about them, and we've, you know, that's been visible here, hasn't it?
and also consultations. Something I learned from industrial relations actually means we'll tell you what we're going to do.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're tick box things if you've got to do it, but actually how you allow the knowledge of people about their own lives into the decision. You know, so when you're talking about well-being, it's so much of the thing about well-being is about ownership and self-determination and feeling valued. You know, they're all things which actually would be answered by participatory democracy. You know, people feeling involved in the decisions that involve, you know, will impact on their lives.
And you know, I know at a Welsh Government influencing level, I've been told that if you're in alliances, that works. So the more voices that you've got say the same thing from different sectors.
Yeah.
So you know, this new Cardiff coalition or whatever, whatever's happening out there. I mean, if you can work together as citizen voices mobilised on areas of interest, then that's more likely to have your voice amplified, I guess.
I mean, this is much like Cardiff People's Assembly and Cardiff Transition come together for the Activist Cafe. Yeah, it's trying to, you know, transition sees itself as an umbrella for all the different organisations to work as a unified, voice. Coalitions are always much stronger.
Yeah.
One of the things, just talk about culture change, I think over the last 30 years the way councils are run is very much you have the democratically elected councils and then you have this layer of officers who are very highly paid and they actually develop a lot of strategy.
Yeah.
Whereas most political parties haven't got used to a culture where they feed in, when they have consultations, but they're mainly about, they want to make cuts, they're mainly about having loaded questions to get the results. They haven't really, I think, developed this culture where you have political parties where they're really in touch with what people think at the base and trying to feed in all these experiences into policy. So almost trying to get that culture shift where it's not just these well-paid experts around the council behind the scenes where there's real consultation, real knowledge on the ground feeding into the political program.
Well, again, the cycle campaign, you know, the things that the traffic officers do to cyclists are rubbish. And, you know, we can, this cycling campaign people are looking at best practice in other places, design standards and things, and can flag up where what the traffic officers are doing is rubbish. And it's probably the same in other sectors. You know, that's just want to know about. But essentially, how do you persuade the council that it's got to listen properly?
There must be models out there. You know, I've seen kind of the citizen panels and kind of there are models out there. It's just kind of maybe looking at them as.
I think. So I was going to say a minute ago. I saw a hand go up then. But one of the things that is aware of that is people actually being not scared to say they're part of transition and wear their other hats too. I think that's always come up for me. Of if everybody just sees us kind of transition, it's like a group. As I said earlier, to me it's not just a group, it's a connected sort of movement. And we've got people from Welsh Government, we've got people from organisations here, we've got people who are just personally here because they're interested. But we've got other faces to ourselves as well. And we only look, I guess, more powerful and value to an organisation if we are seen to represent many and have connections to many. Now that was one of the things I didn't say earlier about one of our achievements is at one point we had over 750 people connected into a mailing list or connection about events and activities. Now it's not tens of thousands, it's not marketable value, but to me that was impressive that we've connected with that many people who wanted to stay in touch. I guess showing our other hats and how we can connect in and not being fearful of it being seen as a political thing or other sort of vision of what transition is. I think it's more recognised now as sort of apolitical, and I just think that is a route of doing it.
Any more questions?
I was just wondering how they did the assessment, the wellbeing assessment in Cardiff. How they did it. Did they just take existing stats?
I was looking at this today, so I'm probably not qualified to say, but it looked like they I think it's the Live Well survey. I think Cardiff Living Well survey that is data collection. But I'll come back to you on that because I didn't really have enough time to look through the process.
And what's your feeling on how Cardiff Council is doing it, has taken it on board?
Well, just probably B-. I'd want to see stuff in there like we're going to commit to being a zero carbon city by 2050. We're going to turn the city Cardiff region deal into being the most sustainable kind of infrastructure development. We're going to see green kind of walls and ceilings and, you know, that's the stuff that I want to see. We're going to spend X amount of money on cycling paths, you know, when you, but I don't, you know, it's not quite there.
There must be some movement on that though, because Cardiff University are very interested in design rules and moves at the moment. I'm waiting to have that discussion to see where that's going, but there seems to be more interest. It may be around air quality, it may be about other things, but when you start seeing universities moving it, then you know there's already talks going on behind us. So it's quite, there are some promising things happening.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a much more vague, generic sort of level, you know. I mean, it is objectives.
It's not,
there aren't
no.
any. It's just sort of vaguely what things are like.
Aspiration.
In the vaguest possible sense, yeah, which it's not at that stage yet. That's where it will really matter when the actual objectives come in.
Yeah. And yes, it's up to us, I suppose.
Because they're
to make sure these objectives are worthwhile.
Yeah, are worthwhile and are followed through. Yeah.
So,
and they're ambitious.
Does anyone want to volunteer to do something about tomorrow afternoon? To review this. I mean, there's a window of opportunity, so come and see me afterwards if you really want that.
Yeah.